Hi, everyone. If you're joining in, please write us a text online about which country you're joining us from today. So we might get started then, if you're ready. Great. I'm Priya Srinivasan. I live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also acknowledge the gods, the goddesses, the spirits, and elders from my culture who are here with me. And I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and we live on stolen land today. I'm an independent artist and also the co-artistic director of Sangam, the first performing arts festival of South Asia in diaspora in Australia. I'm originally from Tamil Nadu in South India and came here to Naarm when I was quite young. I'm happy to start our chat today with just a few little housekeeping points. I wanted to thank all the team members of Artsfront and Feral Arts who have made Little Lunches possible. And I think it's creating such excitement and generating so much interest at this moment right now that we're in. I'm really grateful to be here and joined by a fabulous speaker who I will introduce in just a minute. Just wanted to remind you all that Little Lunches is being recorded, will be streamed live and available afterwards on www.llol.com.au. We're also live on YouTube. We will be sticking to the 30-minute time frame because of the sign language interpreters and captioners as well, who are working really hard. And as I said earlier, if you're just joining us now, please do write in the Zoom chat which country you're joining us from today. There's live captioning available if people click on the captions icon in Zoom. And there's also live signing from Susan at Auslan, who's, for me, she's down below, but she might be stage left for you guys. So just click on Susan's video and pin it if and if anybody wants to ask questions, you can type it out in the Zoom chat as you're speaking. And if there's any, without further ado, I would like to introduce the incredible, amazing Colette Brennan, who's the CEO of Abbotsford Convent in Melbourne. Those of you that don't know her, please go and find a way to introduce yourself to her. She's going to be amazing. Sorry, Colette, I'm just dobbing you in for people coming and meeting you and having chats, virtual chats right now. Abbotsford Convent, as many of you know, is Australia's largest multi-arts precinct. She is also the chair of the Sunshine Coast Arts Advisory Board and a board member of the International Society for the Performing Arts. Previously, she was the director for international development at OzCo and also acting executive director of arts development and director of marketing development at OzCo. She also has been the executive director of Brisbane's internationally acclaimed contemporary circus, Circa, and so many more things. And I could keep going on, but you can also read her bio on Artsfront or look her up online. And I'm really happy that she's here with us today. Usually Veronica Pardo, the CEO of Multicultural Arts Victoria, and I do these Wednesday lunchtimes. Veronica couldn't be with us today, but we're so grateful to have Colette here, especially because she's somebody who has really been an ally to diversity in all its manifestations. And I think this is really to be lauded in the industry. And I personally am really excited about the kinds of questions she brings in every conversation she has. And I would really like to invite you now, Colette, to speak a little bit about yourself, your practice, whatever you'd like to begin with before I ask you a couple of questions.
Hello, everyone. It's great to be here. I'm a big fan of Artsfront always and their undying passion for ensuring that the diverse voices of our sector find ways and means to get together. So I applaud Feral Arts as always for the leadership, and being a great lover of Multicultural Arts Victoria and a super fan of Priya. It's outrageous that all of you sensational people have found each other, but not surprising. So I'm a Irish descent person, born on the land of the Turrbal and Yagara people in Brisbane, and I'm now very proud to work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. My background is theatre, but that quickly changed, and really the threads of my career have been in producing and programming. I've done some work in sector organisations such as Youth Arts Queensland and the Australia Council. And at the moment, at the convent, what inspires me is it brings together so many of my passions. I'm very thrilled to work in a space that is home for many artists. So at the convent, we have 126 tenants working in studios. The majority of them are arts and creative industries people. We have an amazing 11 buildings, beautiful outdoor spaces. It's a place that people, the community themselves, fought to save the convent. It wasn't just shoved into a local community. It was driven by the community who demanded and set up the vision of arts and culture. So I'm very privileged every day to work and stand on the shoulders of giants, of people who actually ran a community campaign for 7 years to save the convent from becoming a blocks of units and a golf course. So I'm thrilled to be part of the convent. It was actually formed in 2004 in its current status. So we're teenagers as an organisation.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Colette. And I think what you've already brought up is some of your concerns around how to work with and through solidarity, leadership, organized protest and resistance as a way of moving forward. How could you share with us right now some of the insights that you've gained from the impact of COVID-19 on the really great work you've been doing? You can refer to anything you've done before, but also now, how are you sort of thinking about moving forward?
Yeah, so obviously we're like every other venue in Australia and every artist. So we're our revenue streams have had a severe disruption, and the convent itself doesn't have any recurrent government funding. We're a social cultural enterprise, so our revenue streams are everything to us. So it's we're under a lot of stress, but everyone is. So we're reflective of the whole sector. So as I understand it, there's projections of minimal impacts on the arts and cultural sector of 70%. We would be reflecting those sort of statistics. That being said, what is really interesting at the moment for us is that we are reducing in our scope, very focused on our purpose, and really refining how we navigate this process through to repair. We're not really interested in, bounce backs and all of those things, I think are language that's used in the media, but I think that the arts and cultural sector has had so many years of impact that this has been quite a brutal blow. We didn't have much scaffolding in and around the sector, and I think it's exposed all of the flaws in the arts sector's relationship to government, and also in relationship to being priority for the philanthropic sector as well. So that being said, the lucky thing I have is that I work in a solid organisation. Our organisation is going to survive. The buildings will be there, the resources will be there. We're closed to the general public, but we're still open to our tenants. A lot of our tenants are working in such difficult circumstances, trying desperately to triage. So it's a lot. I am very lucky though. The things that it's exposed for us at the moment is that I have we have really, really good governance. And at this time, for anyone who runs an organisation, governance has been key. I can't stress enough that I think a lot of organisations would be going through more trauma if they haven't got their governance in place. So I think it does help in that it exposes where your flaws are and where you might quickly need to adjust. And the other thing I've noticed as well is that change is possible. We've done an organisational restructure. We've done things really fast. We've seen the federal government, we've seen state governments and some local governments working really fast. So actually, one of the energetic positives I'm taking from this, that if we all get on board to identify an issue, we can actually solve it when we work together. So for example, when you look at homelessness, we have people now who are homeless in shelter. Why did it take a pandemic to expose that? You know, so they're the things that I'm really inspired by at the moment. I'm inspired by the resilience of my community. I'm really inspired by the resilience of my team. I've been really excited to see flexibility, adaptability in our governance structures so that we could modify and be nimble in our response. You know, that's sort of where we're at.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. And I really take your point about solidarity, and I'm going to come to that in a minute. But I'm wondering if you could also speak about your work with diverse and independent artists, something that you really spearheaded and have followed through on so many ways with First Nations artists and artists of color, your work perhaps with APAM and also with Asia Topa. What were the lenses that you used and took to prioritize the needs of people of color and First Nations people? How do you see possible visions for others like yourselves in institutions who are really the gatekeepers, who have the capacity to open doors? What is it that you can do? And I suppose part of that question is also around making diversity central to how we actually move forward as well. Thinking through how you've done it in other moments where you've been confronted by really hard and oppressive structures, but you've navigated your way through. And if there's any way that you could, you know, speak to some of those things. I know I gave you a lot to think about, but something around those kinds of questions, Colette.
That's what you do, Priya. You go right to the heart of it. Well, you know, I think the first thing is that I acknowledge, and it doesn't mean it's not flawed. I'm very flawed. I'm a white woman in a particular context running a venue. So, you know, you have to actually be aware of what privileges that brings you, and therefore be literal in that and keep yourself to account. The other thing that I've found that's been key in that is by building relationships with incredible arts leaders and artists who are people of colour, First Nations, or experiencing diversity who may not be embraced by the mainstream, is that once a trust is established, those people and communities will keep me in check. I don't try to demand that they teach me, but I know that once we have a trusted relationship, if institutionally we're doing something that's a barrier, or if I personally am, I will be called to account, and it's my job to get myself checked, sorted out, and the learning I need to take. The thing I'm very aware of is that there is so much pressure put on diverse artists to not only be brilliant independently in their own practice, incredible advocates for their culture, but then they have to carry the load of educating us white people because we're too ignorant to understand how much we are culturally bereft by not engaging in diversity. So my position then is actually that I work with my team a lot on where is the exciting work. And from our perspective at the convent, the most exciting and challenging and incredible work is coming actually from the independent art scene, and especially from artists of colour, LGBTQI people who've been working with. We've been doing a lot of work with people who do incredible work with children and young people. Children and young people are often dislocated from access to quality culture. So, you know, that's where we come from. So we look at it as an asset-based approach. We understand, though, that the inequities that happen in the sector mean that there is not enough representation of leading artists to develop their own small to medium companies. We understand that our sector is actually less sophisticated because of our inability to get over our own cultural incompetence to actually work with the wide diversity of artists we have leading in this country. So at the moment, as you know, the convent doesn't have much of a programming budget. That doesn't actually get in the way with the work we need to do. We work with artists who actually have a passion and understanding of why they want to work with us, and we work with them over the long term because we actually can't commission anyone. So I can't have a transactional relationship. I'm not going to buy anyone. I'm not going to have conversations with artists that are in that whole world. And I think that for the long term, I think it'd be great if we had more money and I could just go, here, Priya, let's kick Sangam's ass and take over the venue. But realistically, we get there eventually. The other thing I'm really interested in is challenging the notion that curatorial leadership has to come from one white person who leads an organization. So I'm really interested in developing my own skills and practice that is about self-representation and self-determination, and how as someone who is curating a holistic program for a community can actually work to enable artists' voices to lead and to work in a way where the institution trusts them and vice versa. So we're in a different transaction there as well. So it's not a financial transaction, and it's not a transaction where me and my programming team are the holders of curatorial expertise and we'll ask you to come into it. It's very different. It's much more around, this is the type of community and context within which we're working in. Our priority is independent artists who are working in this innovative way, who represent different cultural contexts. The other positive is we know our audiences love it. We have no problems getting a really incredible audience. So anyone who thinks there's no audience, that myth is fully debunked. But then we work in a way, well, okay, if you're this self-represented expert, what do we do together to realize the curatorial vision? And then how do we experiment together to understand what meaning that impacts, how that impacts? So in a sense, it's a much more high reward, harder process than the typical I want this, I'll buy this touring circuit type of model or conversation. It's not something I'm interested in. Anyway, that was a big rave. Hope that made
No, that's super helpful. I mean, this idea of moving outside in a way, you can't get outside of capital. I mean, that's kind of not anything any of us can do at this point in a way. But I think, the crisis is actually allowing us to consider alternate possibilities for how to move alongside capital and how to negotiate differently with power. And I think that's what you're really pointing out, that moving outside of the typical transactional model, buying and selling, what other ways of engaging are there? And this is what I was pretty struck by with your programming during Asiatopa in particular, which I thought by far was a very successful model. And I'm wondering if you can speak to specifics about some of the kinds of programming you were able to do, maybe just one or two quick examples, and how you did it in a way that was allowing artists a lot of power in the process of being represented.
Yeah. Well, one thing is I think we were in, for example, a project like Kuruhara, which was curated by Thomas Henning in partnership with Terry and the Cuz, so Govind Rubin, who works between Malaysia and Australia. But where it's interesting is that the artist has the power and vision, and we embrace it. But we can also utilize being the venue and all of those sort of things to broker other relationships. So it becomes quite equal, where the artist is doing the heavy lifting on the aesthetic and the curatorial, and we're doing the heavy lifting on how we generate the partnerships in and around that vision to bring it together. So, for example, we would take the heavy lifting and write the grants. They'd be inputting and they'd get sign off, but we would be doing it on their behalf. We were seeking the partnerships and, with Arts Centre Melbourne, the Australia Council. I also got in some philanthropic support. But all I would note is that it's really difficult because we're quite a small programming team without much financial scaffolding around us. And we're working with people who I think are the leading artists but don't have scaffolding around them. But together we make it happen. So we're very clear in the exchange in and around what our areas of expertise are, where our tipping points are. So for example, it's boring, but we're a heritage site. So you can't be putting shit up on our walls, but that's fine. You work around that creatively. Equally, some of our community, we have a lot, we're a busy site. So sensitivities, can you have a big vulva hanging out the door of the convent while the school kids, the Sophia Mundi school kids are going to school? So we negotiated together about the vulva. We hid her during the day. She had a little rest and then she popped out at night. So all of these things are, the funny things that happen in projects, but they speak so much about flexibility and relationships. And honestly, I believe that the artists, so they did trust us. Like, we know our community, they're going to take the vulva. She just needs to be popped out at the right time. And all of those things can be negotiated, but because they trusted us, it wasn't seen as censorship. It was seen as actually accenting the artwork in a way that would privilege it and help land, rather than getting into, and I think because we're not transactional, we're all coming together going, we've got a problem to solve, rather than, I want this and you've got to deliver it this way by this day. I don't know. It was really hard and it nearly killed us, but it was the high point of our lives. Having complete anarchy on site, artists from 30, artists from Timor, Indonesia, people, every single program had no real rules around it. Marketing team was losing their mind because you couldn't necessarily say what was happening. Audiences, members were popping up and doing their own dance routines. One group who wanted to come once came 5 times. Artists who were across the rest of the Asiatopa program were doing shout outs and turning up on site, doing their own pop-ups because they wanted to be part of it. And I think energetically people and artists were attracted to it, and community members, because they could feel it was authentic. And it was also not putting up a really old-fashioned notion of what is Southeast Asian artwork. It was highly contemporary, really political, super fun, engaging, cheeky, naughty, all of the things that we know, but audiences don't often get to see it. And that's what they loved about it.
Yeah, and I have to say also, the precinct itself enables the dropping of the fourth wall so much more easily than formal theatre settings in some ways, which also enables a feeling of community and real sort of audience engagement. And I would say it really sort of engenders a feeling of solidarity. And this is what I was going to ask you to speak a little bit about, and something that's close to my heart and something that Veronica and I are going to do, especially next month. We're going to bring in international speakers, artists from different parts of the world, to really ask what solidarity might look like now, and why it's more important than ever to not only address local concerns, but at the same time to be looking at the local and the global together, which academics call the glocal, right? How do we look at that as a really rich moment of possibility for us? And we were thinking about your fabulous connections around the world, Colette, around this. You don't have to answer, but it's just a prompt. And perhaps also we can open this up to anyone who's attending today, this or any other question you might have for Colette. Any points, any thoughts, any issues, whatever you would like. We'll give you a few seconds to raise your hand or write a comment in the chat, and we'll wait for you. Just let's give people a few seconds, Colette, to see if they have anything. Thanks, Suzanne. Suzanne just said, thank you, that's great. Look forward to further sessions. I met Suzanne in Darwin, so I presume that that's where Suzanne is right now. So great to hear from you.
I met Priya in Darwin as well. That's when I
know.
Darwin, something was in the water at that trip.
It totally was. We didn't meet here in Melbourne, but over there, so that was pretty cool. Okay, it doesn't look like anyone else has any. Oh, she's at the Northern Rivers, she says, today.
God's country.
Yeah, so what I was going to say is people are, oh, Black Dance. Fantastic. Hello.
Hi,
Is that
Miranda. I love
How
you.
are you? How are you, Marinda? So great to have you here. Okay, so here it is. Here's a great question from Marinda. What is the process you put in place if things aren't working? I imagine the challenge is you might not hear about it. We had a big Zoom
that's
around
really
this.
interesting. Yeah. So one thing we've been learning, and it was, I did a project early at the convent because we were telling a settler story of our site, which is just crazy, and it needed to be deepened. So I worked through a process working with some of our Wurundjeri elders, and they put a whole governance structure in and around cultural expertise. So that was really nice in that we had a defined expectation, one, that as the white people we would culturally fail, two, that it wasn't our elders' job to educate us, but three, there was a through line for them to say, you need to get your house in order on this area because it's getting in the way of the cultural business we need to do through the project. So that was one way that was super useful. And now I translate that and use that in a whole bunch of different places because culture is often hidden. And that's often where the disadvantage emerges for people who aren't the mainstream, supposedly, even though white people aren't anymore, whatever. So I think that the culture is pretending it's hidden is actually the problem that creates disadvantage. So being comfortable to have cultural conversations, understanding that we're going to screw up and that we're doing reflections now, for example, on our recent Asiatopa program. And things weren't easy all the time, and there were screw ups on both sides, So I just think it's being sophisticated enough to have a level of cultural maturity where you understand that flaws will happen, that you need to address them, that culture is dynamic and changing, and all of us will be developing in this area. And if you have that as a starting point, I think that you need to look to less conflict.
That's great. Ash Frost has also written, don't know how to clap on this. That was great. We need to own our flaws. And really love that question. Thanks, Marinda, around how do we address these problems, and Colette's response about outing ourselves to our flaws and issues at hand rather than hiding. And I think that's part of the biggest issues that we need to face is really all of us looking at where the problems are and really owning up to it and saying we are making mistakes, but how do we keep going forward? And what are the ways we can rectify these engagements? And this is where I think power often fails to acknowledge itself in its inability to be fluid, to change, to shift. And I think these are some key points that you brought up today, Colette, which I loved hearing about fluidity and flexibility at this particular moment. And again, I want to just return to this idea of how might we look at global solidarity at this particular moment as more key than ever to connect us. And this was the question we were asking 2 weeks ago when Veronica and I were discussing how might this moment enable us to have even deeper discussions around global solidarity. Thank you, Marinda. Marinda just said she came a bit late and she's here from Black Dance. Thank you so much.
Was that a question?
Just a good thing about your thinking through the global, like for example, how at APAM you had these really incredible sessions, for example, from people from different parts of the world. And we were asking at that moment, what happens? We did not know this COVID was going to literally ground us and put us in this pausa mode. So it was just that moment where we actually had people from key institutions around the world discussing already in the room. And I'm saying, how do we reimagine that in the future? Any ideas that you might think about for us to get this going would be great.
Yeah, I think it's always comes down to good practice internationally anyway, that we're part of a global arts community. Just take that as a given. And I've always activated my global networks. I'm very passionate about what I can learn from others. I suppose it starts, though, best engagement comes if you have a level of personal cultural curiosity and understanding that you can learn from other cultural contexts. I have seen, you know, certain activities by different people where they don't really come in, they just go into a global conversation to sell, to get something out, to continue transacting. I don't think that serves us. Those things happen anyway, you know. I think it's actually about relationships, and I think you have to start in that context. So, for example, at the moment, you know, it's bad here, but my friends in New York, it is not good. Their mental health is very, very bad. They don't have JobKeeper, as shit as it is. They don't have JobSeeker. They, you know, a lot of people in Australia are falling through the cracks. That's a given, but it is a major issue over there.
They don't have healthcare. Let's face that. I mean, there's no, anyway, so many differences going on.
Do we care about that? You know, these are the questions. And I think what it's exposed for me at the moment, with the greatest of respect to all of our peak bodies, but I can't see a unified voice from the Australian arts sector. And I think that's done us a disservice since the Brandis cuts. When I look at my Irish colleagues at the moment, I would suggest all of you look at their campaign at the moment. It's incredible. They don't have a music sector off here getting money for this bit, and they don't have a regional arts bit getting money for regional arts. They don't have visual arts. You know, they actually just have a one consolidated voice. The other interesting things that Canadians taught us in the lead up to Trudeau, they did a 5-year program to get their sector together, to actually get the policy levers, the political context together for how they wanted to argue for the relevance of the arts. So it was ready when Trudeau got in. Their whole program was ready to go. So the thing, I think that our global engagement is key. We have to keep doing it. But I think that at the minute, we also do need to look very honestly at our local sector and not use this time to fall apart, to be distracted, which I think helps the political methodology by trying to change the fact that the majors get money at the moment. That hasn't changed for years. So why are we, you know, let's not go back there. Let's actually be a unified sector that isn't broken down into, well, I advocate for music and contemporary music, you know, all of that. I just think it's actually exposed our issues as a sector. And I feel almost nervous saying it, weirdly, but I think it has to be said. I don't feel as someone running a key venue in this country with so many artists in the conversation. I'm not funded by the Australian Council. I'm not funded by state government or local government. I'm not engaged anywhere. I think that's crazy. Why are we doing this? Why are we putting some people in the club and not others?
That's great, Colette. Thank you so much. So excellent what you're saying. And Marinda has been sending so many fantastic questions. I'm like, we can't address it today, Marinda, but we want to invite you to come and join us in a couple of weeks so we can actually have a really generative discussion around your questions, because this whole thing about who's being represented, what are the representations, Marinda's put up these great questions here. Why isn't the sector talking about the entire ecology? People are not talking about the entire ecology. The Australia Council has been undermined since the Brandis cuts. And also, why are there no called CALD dance companies or First Nations companies funded on a proper platform and multi-year funding, or Indigenous companies? Fantastic questions. I want to use this opportunity to thank all of you for contributing today. We've gone over time, so sorry, but thank you so much, Susan. Thank you so much to all the captioners, Artsfront, Feral, for being here, and we would love to continue these conversations in next week or the week after. Please join us. And thank you so much, Colette. Really appreciate your generosity of time and thinking around this.
Thanks, darling. So good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Look after yourselves.
Great. Thanks, everyone.